Hi, and thank you so much for joining us today. I have a question for you. Have you ever been sitting around with some colleagues and had somebody say, I wish we had a ping pong table around here, and everybody nods their head and everybody thinks it's a great idea, and a ping pong table never materializes? Or maybe you've gone to a strategy session with your team. Maybe you've spent a day, 2 days, 3 days talking about new product development or ways that you can improve the customer experience or ways you can change your operational processes to benefit the business. All of those great ideas everybody loves and they're nodding their heads and everybody agrees to it. And then on the plane ride home, or maybe in today's world between the end of the Zoom meeting and dinner time, everybody just goes back to business as usual. And a year later, you find yourself in the same room, having the same conversation about the same opportunities, and you realize that nothing's changed. At Karrikins Group, we call that the failure gap. It's the space between agreement and alignment. And it's where many big initiatives, strategies, great ideas fall when you don't take action on them. One of the things that we've seen recently is that a lot of our clients have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And within those initiatives, it can be easy to fall into the failure gap. It can be easy to agree that they're a great idea and have a hard time taking action on them. And the reason is because it becomes the responsibility of the diversity committee, or maybe the HR team is supposed to make them somehow happen in the organization. When in fact, it takes everybody in the organization figuring out how to make different decisions and exhibit different behaviors in order to bring a strategy or an initiative like that to life. What I'd like to talk with you about today, just for 30 minutes for a quick coffee break, is the power of allies to help bring diversity, inclusion, and equity initiatives to life in your organization. This is a really great concept that everybody can play a role in, and we can try and create the momentum that's necessary to cross the failure gap. Before we dive into it, I'd just like to get a feel from everyone on the webinar. How many people right now have in their organization an active diversity, equity, and/or inclusion initiative that's been going on? Just raise your hand in Zoom. Isn't it amazing that we all know how to do this now? 6 months ago, I wouldn't have had no idea, but we're all getting good at using all of these different tools on these different platforms. It looks like a lot of people are in organizations right now. The majority of people on the call are in organizations right now that have these active initiatives in place. And that's great. I know a lot of companies are really leaning into diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We want to make sure that they move from agreement to alignment, and how we can engage other people in helping to make that happen, how you can create momentum throughout the organization. For me, the idea of being an ally is actually a really personal thing, because in my career, I've had the experience of needing an ally. I'd like to just share with you about 30 years ago when I was first starting my career, and I can't believe it was 30 years ago, but I was fresh out of grad school and I went to work for a very large systems integrator. And it was a predominantly male industry in a predominantly male company. I had the good fortune to have some women there who were wonderful mentors and managers for me, but they were the exception. It was primarily men in the organization, especially on the technology side, which is where I was. About 5 years into the career, I had been doing amazing things all around the world. I had the opportunity to travel and to do some really great work, both in technology and in business, to help create some incredible value for our customers. I was working really hard with amazing people who are still in my life today. My business partner here at Karrikins Group is somebody that I met during that career. My significant other comes from there. Many of my closest friends I can track all the way back to that amazing group of people that I had the great privilege to be a part of. About 5 years in, to go back to the story, I got a pretty significant promotion, and I felt really proud of myself. I also felt really grateful that my hard work and efforts had been recognized. A lot of my friends around the organization called to congratulate me, or they would send me emails. We had a happy hour, and at team meetings I was congratulated. Everybody was just kind of joining me in celebrating the accomplishment and the recognition that I had received, and I was really grateful for that. At the same time, there were some people in the organization who responded a little bit differently. There were several occasions, very public ones, where I was on the receiving end of comments that sounded like this. And I want you just to listen and to see if this sounds familiar to you. I had somebody say, Julie, congratulations on your promotion. I guess it's a good time to be a woman around here. I had somebody actually say during a toast at a happy hour, Congratulations to Julie on her great accomplishment. I guess if I want to be next, I better figure out how to get some more estrogen in my system, from a man who was making a toast at that point. So those types of comments, for me as someone who was in an underrepresented group in that organization, they were really just kind of devastating to me in the moment, because here I felt like I was surrounded by people who had watched me contribute. They'd watched the effort and the hard work that I put in. They knew the contributions that I had made. And yet there was still this deeply embedded mindset that the reason I'd been promoted wasn't because of what I'd contributed, but instead was because I was a diversity promotion. They wanted more women at that level in the organization. Now, in those moments, sometimes I would try and speak up for myself, and I would tell people, we didn't have words like ally or microaggression back then. We just had words like jerk and idiot, and I would throw those around sometimes, like don't be a jerk. But in general, the pushback that I got if I tried to stand up for myself sounded something like this. And again, you may have heard this. Oh, Julie, you just don't have a good sense of humor. You shouldn't be so serious all the time. Or you need to be more thick-skinned. Don't be so sensitive. Those were the kinds of reactions that I would get. I really couldn't effectively stand up for myself because I was in that underrepresented group. What I really needed in that moment was I needed an ally. I needed someone who was in the dominant paradigm, someone who looked and felt and sounded like everyone, like the majority of other people in the organization, to be willing to say, hey, that's not cool. She got promoted because of the contributions that she's made. I needed somebody to be a voice for me and to stand with me in that moment. Now, again, it was the early 90s, and we didn't have a lot of the language and the visibility that we have now around the impact of those kinds of comments or the need for somebody to step into that space. And I know for me, I'm really grateful that we're having this kind of dialogue in the workplace, and we're starting to think about how can people who have some degree of influence start to use that influence to really be a voice for underrepresented people in their organization. And for me, that's really what it is all about when it comes to being an ally. So I'm personally grateful that we're starting to really lean into this idea and have this conversation. The interesting thing is that so many people in organizations can actually be allies. One of the things that I want to share with you today is answering the question of who can be an ally. And then also, if you decide you want to be an ally, what should you do about it? How do you align your behavior in a way that helps you to step into that as effectively as possible? But let's start with thinking about who can be an ally, because I think oftentimes we kind of put that as something that cisgen white males need to deal with. They need to be allies. And that's true, they do. But they're not the only people in the organization that can be an ally. I'm a cisgen white woman. I can certainly be an ally to underrepresented groups in my company. And if you think about yourself creatively and what kind of dominant paradigms you might exist in, I'm willing to bet that you'll find that you can be an ally as well. I'll give you a couple of examples. In the United States, English is the dominant language of business. In the workplace, it's the dominant language. If you're a native English speaker, you can be an ally to people who are coming into the workplace who have English as a second language, or maybe struggle to express themselves effectively in that way. Because oftentimes they might have great ideas, but they're not invited into the right conversations, or they're not included in the decision-making processes because they have a language barrier. So if you're in that dominant paradigm, you can step in and try and make sure that people have the opportunity to have their voices heard. Another example in the US workplace, it's predominantly able-bodied people. People with disabilities are making great strides in entering the workforce, but we can still step in as able-bodied people and try and make sure that people are able to get to the table, that their voices are heard, and that when they're participating in the workplace, they're given the opportunities to advance and to contribute that everybody else is. All different contexts provide the opportunity for you to be an ally in a lot of different situations, but it is context dependent. So in one context, you might be able to be an ally. In another context, maybe you need an ally. We all kind of float between those different realms. And it's just really important to start to think about the different contexts that you're in and how you might leverage your ability in any given context to be an ally. One of the things that strengthens your ability to be an ally is what's called social currency. Social currency is your ability to influence the way that networks happen around the organization and the way that connections are made. Social currency comes from a lot of different things in the workplace, and you may have more of it than you even think. A Couple of ways that you have social currency. One is tenure. People who've been in the organization for a long time often have more social currency than people who are newer to the organization. We also see positional power. If you have the ability to influence who gets training, who we're investing in, who's invited into collaboration sessions, who's brought into firefighting drills with the client, who's put in front of the client, how all of those decisions get made. If you're in a position to make those kinds of decisions, you have social currency, and you can use it to make sure that underrepresented people get a place at the table. Another way to think about social currency is age. People who are between 30 and 50 often have a huge amount of social currency in organizations. People younger than 30 can sometimes be sidelined because they're seen as too new to the situation. People over 50 sometimes get compartmentalized as being a little stuck in their ways or unaware of the current conditions, especially for new consumers. So we see those kinds of assumptions being made. They're not right or wrong. I'm over 50 and I'm still actively engaged in a lot of things that are going on out in the world. So the assumptions that people sometimes make can sideline people who are on the fringes of the dominant age group. So if you're in that 30 to 50 group, you've got some social currency that you can use to bring in people with a lot of experience and bring in people who don't have as much experience and try and create that glue in the organization. So there's lots of ways to think about your social currency. Expertise actually is another great one to think about. If you're an expert in a product or in a geography or in a particular domain or functional area, you have a lot of social currency. As a matter of fact, expertise might be one of the most powerful forms of social currency in the workplace, because people who are experts in a particular area often get to determine who's involved in problem solving, who's involved in innovation work, who are they mentoring and developing, who are they personally investing in to make sure that they're growing in their abilities and their own expertise so that they can then take on bigger assignments and take on more important roles in the organization. So if you have a degree of expertise, that goes in your social currency. So if you're thinking, can I be an ally? I really encourage you to be creative about how you frame yourself and the context that you see yourself in, and then really think about your social currency, because we're going to talk in a minute about how important it is to spend your social currency if you really want to be an ally. I'm willing to bet that you can be an ally in a lot of different contexts, and I know that you might need an ally sometimes too. I'm certainly in that situation for myself. So if we think about what to do if you've decided that you can actually be an ally, what's the next step? How do you move from agreement to alignment and actually take action? How do you lean into that space and that opportunity? I'm going to give you 4 specific ways to do that. But before I do, I just want to pause for a moment. And I want to acknowledge that there's a lot written about being an ally. There's a lot of information out there that's available to you. We're just scratching the surface, excuse me, in a 30-minute coffee break. But there's a lot of resources that are available if you take the time to go out and look it up. I'm hoping this sparks your curiosity about how you can be an ally. Second, the term ally is problematic for some people. People have raised issues about it being performative or self-serving. There's other concerns that have been raised. Those are all valid. If you really want to embrace being an ally, it's important to do your research and understand what some of those concerns are. Don't let it dissuade you if you feel strongly about your ability to be of service to people who are underrepresented in your organization. But do recognize some of the issues and concerns that are out there. They're important to know about. But if you've decided that you do have the ability and you're willing to step into the role of being an ally, let's talk about some ways that you can do that. The first one is to really listen and observe differently. And if you're in a dominant paradigm, this actually can be incredibly challenging. It's one of those things that's simple to say and hard to do. Because when I ask you to listen differently, it means listen to those throwaway comments. Listen to things that you might normally ignore. Pay attention to some of the smaller things that people who are in the dominant paradigm are saying or that they believe. Reasons that they give for why people can't be included in particular discussions, ways that they might frame entire groups of people. Those are the kinds of expressions that are telling you that there's a mindset that needs to be shifted. So if you're in that dominant paradigm, you might be having to challenge yourself about things that you feel very comfortable hearing and starting to listen and hear them differently. I know for me, in the example that I gave, some of those comments just sounded like, oh, you know, that's just so-and-so being himself. And in fact, they were really hurtful to me and they were really difficult for me to deal with. So I needed someone in the dominant paradigm to listen a little bit differently as they were hearing some of those things that were being directed towards me and being willing to tackle it head on. Observing differently is about policies and procedures that are happening in your organization. A great example of this is in interview panels. So people are coming into the organization to interview for a role. If you're in a position to influence that, you might want to make sure that there's diversity in the panel. That doesn't mean that you have to hire somebody just because they're from an underrepresented group, but it does mean you at least need to talk to people. You at least need to meet people and engage with people who come from underrepresented groups so that they can be evaluated and they can be a part of the process. So if you have the opportunity to influence panels, that's a great way to be an ally to entire groups of people, not just to a particular individual. So listen and observe differently. Harder than it sounds, but it's also when you get used to it and when you start doing it, I know you're going to find the opportunity and some things that might surprise you actually about what people who are in the dominant paradigm are saying and how that might be influencing people who are underrepresented in your organization. The second one is actually really interesting to me, and that is to solve the right problems. So addressing the right problems is about knowing that if an underrepresented person is feeling a certain way, the problem isn't with that person. And in my own example, I didn't need to be comforted. I didn't need an ally to step up and say to me, Julie, you just need to be more thick-skinned. You need to let it roll off your back. You need to ignore it. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the mindsets and beliefs of the people who were saying those things and the way that they were expressing what they deeply believed, which was that I had not earned the promotion. I'd been given it because I was a diversity promotion. That's what those comments really meant, and that's the problem that needed to be addressed. So if you're going to step into the space of being an ally, you have to have the courage to challenge the dominant paradigm. Don't just try and make someone who's underrepresented feel better. Address the problem that's making them feel bad. That's how you become an ally in the workplace. And I'd really encourage you to think about that because that takes a lot more from in terms of individual action than just to try and make somebody feel better after the fact. Step into the opportunity to challenge the dominant paradigm where necessary and address the right problem. The third way that you can really actively move from agreement to alignment and step into the space of being an ally is by being willing to use your social currency. We talked earlier about social currency being things like tenure and expertise and age and language. Where are you in the organization positionally? How can you exert your influence so that you're building networks and you're supporting interactions that include underrepresented voices? You can use social currency in the moment in a meeting. If you notice that somebody's getting interrupted or that someone's getting talked over, or when their ideas are shared that people are just kind of moving past them and not taking them seriously. You might also take the opportunity to amplify people's ideas or people's voices in a meeting. So how can you help bring that voice of an underrepresented person? How can you bring that voice forward in the moment? That's one way to use your social currency. Another way is to bring people along. So especially if you're an expert or if you have decision-making authority over who gets included, if you can bring new people into the conversation, that's a great way to help them to develop their own relationships and connections, to develop their own expertise, and also to make a contribution into whatever situation or meeting or discussion might be happening. So using your social currency is really all about helping people who are in underrepresented groups to get dialed in to a more dominant paradigm so that they can be as effective as possible when they're in that space, that they have the relationships, that they have the language, and that they have the confidence to be able to speak their minds and kind of make their contributions as well as possible. So I'd really encourage you, again, think about what your social currency is and how you can spend it, because the more you spend it, the more you accumulate. The more you're willing to spend your social currency, the more it comes back to you, because you then become the glue between more and more people in the organization. And that's really what social currency is all about. And that's what influence in the organization is about. So if you have it, spend it. It will come back to you in spades, I promise you. I'd like to pause and just take a minute and give you an opportunity in the chat to just enter some ideas that you might have about how you could spend your social currency. Today, tomorrow, in the next hour, what are some easy ways that you might be able to really lean into this opportunity to move from agreement to alignment and actually spend some of your social currency to reach out to someone who's underrepresented in your workplace and bring them forward in some creative ways. I'm just going to give you a minute to put that in the chat, and I'm going to take a look at what people are putting in there. I see a couple of good ones coming through. Bruce, that's a great idea about bringing someone on a sales call, especially for younger people in the organization who are trying to learn how sales really works. It's a very kind of mysterious process for a lot of people. So if you can bring someone else along and give them the opportunity to see how that magic happens, that's a really wonderful way to use some of your social currency. Tom, you put up there listening for side comments. And yeah, I really appreciate that. Especially if you're in the dominant paradigm, paying attention to those little side throwaway comments in a different way is a great way to use some of your social currency. It takes work, it takes effort. So I just want to say that that's a really important thing to put some time and attention to. And Brian, I think similarly, you're saying going out of your way to listen in new and different ways. It's just hard to do. So thank you for putting that out there. And again, I recognize you for being willing to put some effort into that. When you're in the dominant paradigm, you have to put a lot of intention behind listening differently and trying to hear for different things. Carol, you've got eliminating bias around accents. Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot. People, just because they have an accent or English isn't their first language, it doesn't mean they aren't incredibly bright, have great ideas, and can make a huge contribution. But sometimes we have to work a little bit harder to make sure that that their voices are heard, that they have a place in the room. Brian, I like your idea of asking for suggestions as well. And I see having pizza with them. I'm always down for pizza. It's a great idea. Maybe you also let somebody have a voice in what toppings get put on the pizza. But I think pizza is a great equalizer. So I think that's a great suggestion. I just want to say yes to all of these great suggestions that are coming through the chat. These are all easy ways that you can start to move yourself from agreement to alignment and being an ally as a part of your organization's larger diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. What I really want to emphasize is that these are what we call micro actions. They're not asking you to boil the ocean. You don't have to solve everything, but you can solve what's right in front of you and what's possible for you to step into. When we get enough people taking micro actions, we start to counteract microaggressions. It doesn't take something enormous to shut down a microaggression and actually shift enormously the impact that they have on someone who is in an underrepresented group. I know for me, it would have meant the world to me if somebody would have stepped up in that moment and taken the opportunity to take a micro action that would have countered the microaggressions that I was experiencing. And by the way, that story I told was the first, but not the last moment when I really could have used an ally in the workplace. And I know that for a lot of people, you've had that experience. And so if you have the opportunity to mean the world to somebody, why wouldn't you take advantage of it? That brings me to my last point about how to move yourself into being an ally. And that's simply to start with self. By starting with self, we all start to build the momentum that it takes to get over the failure gap, to move from agreement to alignment, and to really bring these kinds of initiatives to life. Starting with self means saying, first of all, where am I in a dominant paradigm? Remember, there are layers of dominant paradigms. Maybe you're in a dozen dominant paradigms. Maybe you're in 3. Whatever one you're in, you have the opportunity to be an ally to somebody who is not in that paradigm. It also means recognizing that you have social currency and being willing to spend it. You have to acknowledge that you have it, though. You have to be willing to say, yeah, I'm the expert in this domain. I actually do get to decide who I spend time with, who I develop and grow. I get to decide who's in the innovation sessions. And maybe I should take a look around and see if there are some underrepresented voices that might be really able to make a significant contribution in that way. So as you think about starting with self, think about the small actions that you can take that will really mean the world to people who are in underrepresented groups in your organization. So as you think about this idea of the power of being an ally and the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives in your organization, I would really encourage you to think about how you can help build momentum to move from agreement to alignment, to cross the failure gap, and to really get some great momentum and energy behind bringing these things to life. It's not about the diversity committee, and it's not about HR, and it's not about somebody else doing their job. It's about every single one of us taking the opportunities that present themselves to us to actually lean in and to do something differently, to exhibit a different behavior, different mindsets, so that we can start to create change in our workplaces. So with that, I want to make sure that we end on time. And so I just want to say there's a lot of ways to take it forward. One is get curious. Explore some of the other resources that are out there. Understand what this idea of being an ally really means in the workplace. We're going to send out a PDF as a follow-up that will give you some additional resources that you can explore if you want to, and I hope that you do. I hope this has piqued your curiosity, and you'll get that from us in the next couple of days. And I would just say, if you want to, reach out, say hello at karrikinsgroup.com. We're happy to spend 30 minutes with you talking about moving from agreement to alignment, whether it's around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or maybe it's around any other strategic initiative that you might have. Moving from agreement to alignment is the focus of our business, and it's something that we know is possible, but it takes energy, it takes commitment, and it takes everybody doing their part, whether it's something as important as going into a new geography or reorienting your product suite, or something like diversity, inclusion, and equity, where you're doing something internally and you're trying to make the workplace a better place for everyone. I know that it's possible to move from agreement to alignment, and I know that when people do it, amazing things happen in organizations. So I just want to say thank you so much for giving us 30 minutes of your time today and really just thinking about how you can show up as an ally. There's tremendous power in it. And remember, if you can mean the world to somebody, why wouldn't you want to do that? We all have that opportunity, and I encourage you to go out and look for it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to sign off and say goodbye, and we hope to hear from you soon.